All right. Good morning or good afternoon to you, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to today's ServiceMax webinar. We're happy to have Aberdeen Group co-sponsoring our event today. This webinar is entitled Service Profits and Raving Customers, the CFO's Agenda in 2013. My name is Nicole Sanders, and I'm just going to be running the technical side of today's event, make sure everybody has a good experience online. Before I turn it over to Susan Tonkin, who will be moderating today's session, I'm just going to run through a few logistics. Right now, you're logged in to GoToWebinar. You should see our opening slide. It has the ServiceMax logo and the title of today's presentation. There's a toolbar with a questions panel in the right-hand corner of your screen. You can send questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll be moderating a Q&A session at the end using this panel. And also, I'll be available to address any technical problems or questions you have throughout the presentation. So we are recording today's presentation, and we'll be able to make it available to you in the next few days, and the actual PDF of the slides today as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Tonkin, who's our Director of Product Marketing here at ServiceMax, to introduce today's speakers.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. So today's speakers, we have a great panel of folks here today to talk about this really important topic. At ServiceMax here, we live and breathe service. We're passionate about service, and that goes all the way to the top here. So we're excited to have one of our executives here to present as well. So our first presenter, and we'll have a lot of back and forth banter on this session, which will be very nice, will be Ali Pinder. He's the Senior Research Analyst at Aberdeen Group. He's someone we've worked with for the last several years here at ServiceMax, and he focuses on best practice and technologies that enable service executives to improve post-sales service and the overall customer experience. So tons of great research coming out of Ali and his organization, and he's also been very active in building a community of chief service officers to take part in Aberdeen's research. So we're super excited to have Ali as our main presenter today. And also joining us is Rick Gustafson, our CFO here at ServiceMax, obviously a key contributor to the company's business strategy, oversees all of our financial operations, and brings 20 years of financial management and leadership experience and guiding emerging growth technology companies. So we're super excited to have someone at the helm of our financials that is so passionate about service, and you'll definitely hear that come through in the presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Ali to kick us off.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Nicole. And I'm thankful for everyone who's joined today. I look forward to discussing a number of key topics with everyone on the call when we look at the state of service management. Today, I will provide you with some insight into the Aberdeen research methodology, and in particular, the coverage area that I take part in from a service management perspective. From there, I will give you some background on the state of service management project that we conducted earlier this year and detail why it is important for the CFO to be involved in this conversation. Then I will converse with Rick, as Susan stated, and walk you through some of the key trends in service management, looking at service profitability, margin disparity between service and products, the impact of service on financials, and how top-performing organizations are the best in class differentiate themselves from their peers. We will then identify some final thoughts. We'll turn it back over to Susan to talk a little bit about ServiceMax and give you an overview of their solution and leave some time for a Q&A. As Nicole stated, please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we will ensure to either answer the questions at the end of the call or via email over the next couple of days. So with that, let's begin with a brief look into Aberdeen research methodology. Aberdeen is, for those of you on the call that don't know, is a third-party market research firm which consists of 14 different practice areas. Each practice area conducts primary research through surveys, and we analyze that data to create research content. In particular, I take the lead when we look at service management topics that consist of service strategy, field service, and overall service parts management. All of the research you'll see from Aberdeen comes through the lens of two frameworks. The first of which is our best-in-class maturity framework. In each of our studies, we ask a series of KPI questions that determine the top 20% of performers, which we consider the best in class, the middle 50% being industry average, and the bottom 30% being laggards. We then dive into what we call our PACE methodology, which looks at the pressures that impact an organization, both internal and external, We highlight the strategic actions that organizations take to mitigate these pressures, and then look at the internal capabilities and technology enablers that organizations implement to excel. From the PACE, we can then build a roadmap for success for organizations like yourselves and highlight how an organization can move from either laggard to industry average and all the way up to best in class or stay best in class. I hope that gives you a good introduction to the Aberdeen research methodology. Now let's jump into the reason why you're here on this call, the data. Each year, Aberdeen and myself, we take the pulse of service operations and we look at the best-in-class trends in service management. We've been tracking the impact of service on overall organization and the increased revenue opportunities that are being driven by the service organization for some time now. It is our hypothesis that top-performing organizations not only provide best-in-class, the top 20% of performers, for their customers, but they are also able to do this efficiently while boosting profitability. The importance of the service organization on profitability and the viability of the organization is one of the reasons why we wanted to include Rick in this conversation. So I think at this time it would be important to find out why Rick finds it integral to be involved in this dialogue on service differentiation and service excellence. Rick, can you give a few thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Al. I appreciate the intro, and I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. I think every CFO should be part of the conversation. And I think if customers, let me just back up a little bit. And when I think about services, I think about it sort of broadly. Anything that happens, any activity or process sort of after the sale to a customer. So that could be call center services, that could be field services, that could be professional services, as we have here at ServiceMax, all very similar. And so if you believe customer success is really important, it is a company value, which almost every company says it is, then it's incumbent upon the service organization to lead the charge in delivering against this. So why the service organization? The service team spends more time with customers than any other part of the organization. And I happened to read an online article recently, and I saw a quote from a field service engineer who said, sales has all the fun. They get to wine and dine the customer. But, services, we marry them, which is so true. But there's a unique relationship that gets built there. So services builds a relationship with the customer, and in so doing, in my opinion, shapes the brand and the reputation of the company more than any sales, marketing, or advertising program. So critical to me that services be front and center as an organization. We can all relate to this in our personal lives as consumers, whether in a retail establishment or at a restaurant. Great food and lousy service just sours the experience. I know that I've recently had my own experience with this with an online retailer, and the thing that struck me was when I had an issue working with the call center, they addressed my problem quickly in a very personalized way, and the loyalty that drove for me made a huge difference. And so my wife and I, our purchases from this online retailer have increased significantly, all for me because of the service organization. So if you believe all that, then services should be on the CFO's radar for sure, because it deserves the requisite attention and the investment. And I will say at ServiceMax, we certainly believe this, we live this, we breathe this, and I probably spend a third of my time on services-related activities and discussions, and a lot of those conversations revolve around making additional investments in our services organization, whether it be people or technology. There's a lot of activity, a lot of thought that goes into driving that part of our organization.
Thanks, Rick, for that introduction, and I definitely am happy to hear that, service story and the service journey is important for the CFO within your business, and we're looking forward to further highlighting that throughout this presentation. With that, let's go ahead and jump into some of the early data slides that we have tied to the service management or the state of service. The profit-centric view of service is one that we here at Aberdeen have been tracking for the past few years. I like to start this slide on many of my presentations. Even though we often feel like all businesses run their service operations as a profit center with a dedicated P&L, management oversight, and clear strategic goals for service. And this slide shows that that isn't always the case. The best-in-class are much more likely to run service as a profit center, with nearly 3/4 of the best-in-class currently doing this, but just over half of all other organizations currently have a profit-centric approach to service. There are a number of reasons why some organizations may not be able to switch to this approach, and we'll outline some of those towards the end of this presentation. But at this point, I would like to understand from Rick, what do you feel is the impact of managing a business unit as a separate P&L?
Yeah, so it heightens the visibility, accountability, and focus on that part of the business, for sure. I mean, give you an example. At ServiceMax, we start every single leadership meeting. Our services executive leads the charge on the current state of affairs with our customers. And there have been times when we never get to anything else. So it's that important, and it gets that much visibility and accountability. But that also means that CFOs like me are going to ask for lots of metrics. So there are, with that attention and accountability comes lots of questions and some insights as well. But that gives the service business unit leaders, I think, an opportunity to have more influence and impact on the company. They certainly have an easier time receiving investment and resources. And I think it's a great platform to highlight customer success stories.
Okay, thank you, Rick. At this time, I think we'll open it up for a quick poll to see how everyone on the call views their service organization.
And folks, you should have a little pop-up window that came up that says, do you manage your service business as a cost center or a profit center? And you can select cost center, profit center, or you don't know. So we've got some results coming in already. About 65% of you have voted so far, and we're definitely getting a big number for profit center, which we love to see. Right now, the poll is showing around 69% of you are managing it as a profit center. We're going to go ahead and publish the results. So about 67% of you have chosen profit center. 27% of you are still managing it as a cost center, and quite a large chunk of you said you don't know. As we were talking about this topic earlier in the week, I know Rick was passionate about those that you have to know.
Have to know.
Yeah.
Perhaps the finance team is not providing you the information, and that's why you don't know. Anyway, those bad finance people.
But definitely great data, and Allie, I know you have some parallel data from the study as well.
Yes, thank you. And I do think those polling numbers align with, this slide that we're seeing here around, just close to 3/4 of organizations from a best-in-class perspective do currently manage their business as a profit center. We see that moving forward and continuing. When we look moving forward into 2013, even though nearly 3/4 of the best-in-class and half of all others currently manage a service business in 2012 as a profit center, we're excited to see that, nearly 7 out of 10 organizations we sampled, regardless of their maturity class, whether they're best-in-class, industry average, or laggard, they do have intentions to move to that profit-centric approach to the service organization. And I think this is a direct result of the increased importance of service within organizations, much to what Rick stated earlier from his view. Service is becoming more and more important in businesses, and it's being tasked with not only having service leadership, but also building a strategic path for the organization, both from a profitability and revenue generation perspective. Rick, I have another question for you. Are there negatives to managing a business unit solely as a cost center? As we see here, just a quarter of organizations aren't planning on measuring their business as a profit center.
Yeah, Allie, good question, and I do think there are some negatives, and I've got some firsthand experience with this, also in transitioning from just a cost center to a profit center. But generally speaking, when it's managed as a cost center, far less attention, and the conversations tend to lack energy and enthusiasm, and really the business unit, if you will, is more of an afterthought than a forethought. And when it comes to direct conversations with the CFO, they tend to be, grinding out more costs, and incremental investments are limited, and they're typically centered around cleared hard dollar cost reduction initiatives and not growth initiatives. And really, that's not fun for for either the services executive or the CFO. These are not enthusiastic, energetic conversations. So I will say my own personal experience in a prior life with a prior company, we ran the service part of the organization as a cost center. And when I got there, I was not a big fan of that. And I worked with the service executive, and because we bundled, we actually had a pricing scheme where we bundled services in with the product. So we didn't have specific accounting to break it out. So he and I worked together, came up with an assumption, sort of an internal proxy P&L. As each product was sold, we assigned a services revenue component. And then we allowed him to manage against that as a P&L. And initially, of course, the business was operating at a loss, but it was pretty incredible, the transformation that transpired over the next 4 to 6 to 8 quarters in terms of revenue growth. It converted to be a profitable business. Many more creative service offerings to our customers, much more engagement with our customers. And as I watched customer retention rates and tracked those on a monthly basis, I saw a clear impact upward to the right trajectory, and it was largely, almost solely, as a result of the service organization and running it as a P&L, giving the service executive and the service team more power, more investment, more initiative. So the power of the relationships that you build through the service organization, they came through in the numbers. So I'm a big fan, as you can tell, of running this as a P&L, not a cost center.
And it's also good to hear, Rick, that you've been involved in an organization that was able to move from a cost view to that profit view, and that we can, hopefully through this webinar, help outline how organizations can move up that path. So what you just saw is a look at where organizations intend to be, but how do your peers actually do in 2012? This next slide shows you that nearly 70% of organizations sampled did in fact generate a profit from service in 2012. And in a somewhat still reeling economy, I think this level of profitability is quite important for the overall viability of the business. And if you've yet to see these types of results within your organization, I know we saw that a number of you don't know whether or not you're currently being managed as a profit center or you're currently being still run as a cost center. It's safe to assume that your peers are getting at those profits that you're hoping for. And you should look to adjust your strategy to ensure that service is the focus for your organization in 2013 and beyond. Rick, do you think it's a red flag for you, particularly if service is not generating a profit?
Yeah, good question, Ali. It certainly begs the question as to why it warrants further investigation. And I gave you an example of a company that I had worked with previously, and that's exactly what we did and what I did. And there are certainly times you'll make a conscious effort to take a loss on services to acquire or retain product revenue, but it would seem troubling to me, and I think to almost any CFO, if the service business as a whole were unprofitable. And so, as I did before, and as I would do again, digging into this and sort of peeling back the layers of the onions, thinking about, from a revenue standpoint, what level and what types of services are being offered? Are they routine, versus high value add? Is there more opportunity to offer higher value added services? Are we not billing for events that we should be? On the cost side, evaluating the whole delivery cycle from, warranty leakage and inefficiencies in the service delivery process chain. I know we have an example here at ServiceMax where the CFO of a customer of ours got intimately involved in driving the ServiceMax initiative, and he had a feeling that there were some inefficiencies in their service delivery process, and sure enough, it turns out that they had a pretty massive warranty leakage problem because they had no visibility into warranties with their customers. So they were shipping out parts, and their partners were shipping out parts, replacement parts, at no charge because it would take too long and it was too hard to do entitlement checks. Sure enough, he implemented ServiceMax, and a year later, he told us to the tune of a couple $1 million a year in cost savings. that can mean the difference between a profitable service organization and an unprofitable one.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty powerful case study. I definitely think a number of people on the call will look for some of those profits in their businesses. In this current slide, not only did approximately 7% of organizations attain profitability in 2012, but more than half of those organizations we sampled actually anticipate that they will actually generate even greater profits in 2013 as a proportion of overall revenue. Only 28% of organizations, sampled here have more of a pessimistic view of the ability for service to drive at those greater proportions of revenues in 2013. And I think to the point that Rick made with his case study, service is definitely not only an opportunity if we actually look at it from an intelligent perspective to drive at more revenues within the business, but to actually get on the radar of the C-suite. I think part of the value of getting Rick's insight is actually to show that service means something to both the top and bottom line. As the CFO, would you be worried, Rick, if service grows too fast in relation to the growth of the overall organization?
Not at all, Allie, not at all. In fact, I think the data would suggest to the contrary. So I came across an interesting study recently. A consulting firm did a study of manufacturing companies over a 15-year period and showed a clear linkage between percentage of service revenue, and as that increased, the firm value increased. And so if this is not music to a CFO's ears, I don't know what is. And if you're in a business where your service margins are at least what the product margins are or not better, then to me that's a no-brainer to invest in the growth of services. That probably, if you sort of look underneath that, that probably means more interaction with the customers, a good thing, building deeper, more trusted relationships with your customers, and really getting to that point where you're going from a vendor to a partner, which I think every service organization aspires to do. And if you do this, it'll show up in the numbers. And the service organization and the service folks can then become really effective salespeople for the company. And that can lead not just to more service dollars, but as a result of that, product revenue as well. Another great example from a CFO of one of our customers. He was really interested in driving the growth of their service business, and he invested in a ServiceMax and Salesforce solution. He felt it really important to have a full view of the customer, and not just from the sales side, but from the service side. So the service organization could see everything that sales had done all the way to all the servicing. And I will quote from him. Service technicians could have actionable data at their fingertips. That was the driving need for this. In his words, they can now speak intelligently to customers because we're able to communicate exactly what's going on with their service every step of the way, instead of them being upset because they haven't heard from us in a week. He goes on to say, picking up a new account a month ago, which year over year will increase the service business by 38%. There was a zero chance we'd have secured that large of an account without the system in place. So I think the data speaks to growth of service.
Yeah, no, and I definitely, once again, thank you for that case study. Showing that from your view, a growing organization is one that's growing with service. It's something that's important for my research here at Aberdeen, and I think it's something that our readers like to hear and see. In fact, that we all are very interested and intrigued, and we love talking about service and talking about the best practices. But to understand that there is value that's being seen from your level within the organization is definitely something to be applauded. Much of the reason for this optimistic view for half of organizations around the service operations is its actual ability to outperform products from a margin perspective, and it's something that Rick alluded to just a second ago. But nearly half of all organizations stated that service margins were actually higher than product margins within their business. And 40% of those organizations actually found that service margins were higher than 10% or more than their product margin counterparts. On average, we took an overall weighted average, and we found that service margins were actually 10.7% higher than products overall. And even though we saw this, from a higher perspective from service, not all organizations have found that service margins were higher for their businesses. But I would attribute some of that disparity to organizations that have yet to efficiently manage their service operations. And I think when we talked about warranty leakage and looking at inventory costs, looking at transportation costs, and overall efficient delivery of field service operations, if any of those functions within service aren't being run efficiently, they can easily erode at the service profits that should be coming into the business. Rick, how would you see that overall product commoditization has impacted profitability, and more so the outlook for the overall company that may or may not still be product driven?
Yeah, Ali, that's a tough place to be if you're from sort of product commoditized business and margins are declining over time. I think this, though, speaks to services and a real opportunity to leverage the services. So as we talked about before, creating value-added service offerings to drive deeper relationships. I think the other thing that service organizations can do, and we do this at ServiceMax, use them as a direct feedback loop, sort of a voice of the customer to the product organization to help drive product improvements and product innovations that ultimately give you an opportunity to deliver higher product margins.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. When we look at the next data point, another reason many organizations have strategically looked or decided to focus on service beyond just the margin story that we just outlined is the fact that it costs less to service a current customer than go out and find a new one. And I don't think that's a shock to anyone in the room, but half of all organizations sampled find this to be the case, with another 18% stating that the costs are at least equivalent. Oftentimes, we forget about all the costs associated with identifying, marketing to, and then closing new customers. In our current technology-driven economy, where we all have mobile devices at our fingertips and we're always available and on the grid, there's even a pre-sale cycle where prospects actually find out more about your organization before you even begin your marketing campaigns to sell something to them. And for all these reasons, it is much more cost-effective to just provide exceptional service to customers that you already have, satisfy them, and then build new products and services to fill those needs. Furthermore, the impact of a satisfied customer isn't only that you don't have to find as many new customers. We also looked at the impact of exceptional or best-in-class customer satisfaction in relation to unsatisfied and how this impacts other metrics. Clearly, satisfied customers lead to higher retention levels, a higher score, whether you're using tools like NPS or other metrics, and almost as importantly, satisfied customers result in higher overall company revenue growth and service revenue growth. These metrics should clearly show the value of leading with service and ensuring that the organization looks to provide exceptional services to not only satisfy customers, but also exceed their expectations. Rick, how do these performance numbers resonate with your view of the importance of service?
So going back to the pie chart that you showed, I'm mortified that a quarter of the respondents don't know that whether or not cost of service is more or less than the cost of new customer acquisition. You have to know this. And in almost every business, the cost of new customer acquisition is orders of magnitude more than the cost of service. And so taking care of your existing customers after you've made a new investment, a big investment to acquire them, is absolutely critical. And everybody should know the economics around that. As far as the link between customer sat and loyalty revenue, I love this slide. And the left-hand column there, to me, this tells it all. So the companies on the left understand the importance of the service organization leading the way to customer success, and thereby reaping the rewards of revenue, market share growth, and though not explicitly shown on here, I guarantee in profit and market capitalization.
Okay, thanks, Rick. I definitely agree that the best in class get this story and they understand both. They measure the data points so they understand where they're performing and how the value of service, but they also can then turn that intelligence into actual KPI improvements. And we like to see the slide too on all of our data points. The top goal for CSOs, Chief Service Officers, as we say here at Aberdeen, and service, in fact, is improving service revenues. This goal is related to the customer experience and creating happy customers, but as services become more of a strategic part of the organization, it must have very clear goals to drive revenues for the organization. On the previous slide, we saw that satisfaction drives profitability and drives revenue growth for the organization and better retention. But as service leaders become more in tune with the CFO and more in tune with the overall C-suite, looking at key drivers for revenue and profitability is definitely how you're going to get in front of the right people and get the budgets that you need to drive change. What's interesting to me on this slide is we asked what was your primary goal and also your secondary goal. So even if the primary goal wasn't to drive service revenue, it's definitely a secondary goal for the CSO, and it should be for everyone on the call. Rick, what do you believe should be the top goal for service as it relates to the overall organization?
So I'm not surprised by these responses, and mine are similar. And I think customer success and the service business economics, revenue and profit, they go hand in hand. And you just can't have attractive economics without great customer experience and great customer success. So I don't know how you decouple them. In my mind, they go hand in hand. And at ServiceMax, we always say job 1A for the service organization is customer success, and job 1B is the service business economics.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that, if you look at all four of the top goals, they're definitely intertwined, and they need to be intertwined in order to have the results that you want in business. I definitely agree with that point. So, we have an understanding of the goals of the organization, looking at revenue, looking at customer experience. But how are your peers actually measuring the success of the service organization? The top KPI used to evaluate success is customer satisfaction, revenues, and profitability of service. These KPIs, I'm sure don't come as any shock to you, Rick, or to anyone on the call. But, we can definitely see that all of these, the top three up there are very interrelated metrics. Satisfied customers lead to a bigger share of wallet and revenues with the hope that service margins will result in profitable growth. We still see that 40% of organizations measure their success on overall service costs within the business. And I think it is important when you look at, being profitable to not only, drive up service revenues, but to also look at, the costs that are running or, impacting your business and making sure that you're managing service as efficiently as possible to hit both the bottom line and top line growth. Rick, from your perspective, what's the primary measure of success for the service organization? And beyond that, what other metrics are on your dashboard beyond metrics we see here to evaluate service?
Yeah, good question, Ali. So from our service organization, professional service organization, we measure kind of the key things that we look at. So customer satisfaction, customer feedback by project on a project-by-project basis. How we did against from a project standpoint, against the deliverables that we promised the customer. Project profitability. Then we look at, in an aggregate basis, sort of actual service revenue and profit versus the targets that we had set out. And then underneath that, kind of consultant utilization and realization. So those are the things that are on my dashboard. And really important, drill deep into these on a project-by-project basis, on a regular basis. We have customers who, Pitney Bowes in particular, who has shared some of their key metrics, and we had a webinar last week, and I think if it's not already, will soon be on our website. They did a terrific job of sharing some of their dashboard metrics, and they sort of aggregate them in buckets. So one of those buckets was customer experience around engineers making contact and missed SLAs. There was another bucket of service revenue, kind of build versus non-build events and upsell opportunities identified. Another bucket was operational efficiencies, so first-time fix rates, mean time to repair, technician utilization. Those were all kind of key metrics, and I would encourage everybody to go view those if they're not available, when they become available. Very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think you outlined, 20 to 30 metrics that we should all be tracking. And I think it's important, to highlight the fact that, it's not just about, having measurements in place or having metrics, but what you do with that intelligence and helping that drive, the strategic vision of the service organization, both tactically on a daily basis with customer interactions, but also strategically from a top-level CSO perspective.
Absolutely.
So throughout this presentation, all these data points are great, and they're interesting to see the trends. But we all recognize that they will lead to service differentiation and best-in-class status. But what's stopping you on this call? Like, why aren't we able to drive at the performance levels that we want? Why aren't we managing business as a strategic arm for the organization, or service as a strategic arm? There are a number of roadblocks that have stifled many service businesses in truly growing profitably and becoming a differentiated offering for the organization. Many organizations on this call and in our sample size are struggling with, that still having that cost-cutting mindset from leadership as it looks to service. We all understand that service has higher margins, and we've outlined, what those levels are from a product perspective. But still, the ability for organizations to cut costs from service or out of the service operations has stopped many initiatives from even starting. Also, many of your peers are still facing concerns over the global economy. Whether it be in local or foreign markets, service leaders are still wary of a full-on push into growing the service business within the organization. And finally, we're still seeing from many of your peers, anecdotally and in the data points, that technology, both for budget and infrastructure perspective, is still a barrier for service growth. It's a challenge, and I think all four of these and many more still come up in front of the service leader and the CSO. I want to hone in just on technology for your perspective, Rick. What hinders the increase in IT budget for service from where you sit?
So probably first and foremost, not getting the CFO involved in the new initiative beforehand. So after the fact, never a good idea. Beforehand and building an ally, always a great idea. And I think the other thing is creating an awareness of what's possible. So creative people with all these new technologies like ServiceMax and mobile devices, there's so much that's possible today, and making the CFO aware of that. I mean, we're seeing some amazing results from our customers who are embracing this. So it's incumbent upon services to make the organization, make the CFO aware of what's possible for the business. And then, of course, always a good, solid, and rigorous business case to support the initiative. And CFOs and CEOs love the one PowerPoint slide that's really simple, that answers the question very succinctly: how can this initiative impact our business? Even before you get into any details, that's always super important. And as I said again, using the CFO, getting the CFO as an ally beforehand, got to get him involved, get him or her involved. And I think that's super important. Those would be my pieces of advice. And in fact, on that last note, if anybody in the audience needs any help, wants any advice on how to get the CFO involved and really help drive services initiatives, happy to help you. Send me an email, call me, whatever. Happy to provide advice, help, whatever you need.
Yeah, no, I definitely see, that link between building the service business case and actually involving senior level leadership into the projects and the needs, but also the value that's going to be reaped from those gains is important. And I definitely think, you obviously already know the service strategy is important, and it's the way you need to lead the organization. But I definitely think that we don't, as service leaders, do enough to, inform you of the impact of, service to profitability, revenues, and the customer experience, and how that drives, real business metrics and transformation. I definitely want to thank you, Rick, for, providing your insight, and I hope everyone on the call enjoyed listening to how you view service and the service agenda. At this time, I'll pass it on to Susan to provide a quick overview of ServiceMax.
Great. Thank you so much, Allie. Great content from both you and Rick. And we have a number of questions that have been coming through in the panel, so keep those coming, folks. I just have a few slides to, if you're not already familiar with ServiceMax, introduce you to who we are and what we're all about. Really, our goal at ServiceMax is to help our customers perfect their service delivery, grow their service revenue, and ultimately delight your customers. So our mantra is really imagining flawless field service in your organization. So that's what our whole focus is. You can hear the passion behind Rick's interest in service, and everyone here is really a big service advocate. And the way we deliver that is through our end-to-end suite. So we deliver our suite in the cloud. It's got a broad list of capabilities that help organizations manage field service from end to end. So it's not just about, a customer calls in with a problem, I've got to solve their problem, I've got to dispatch a technician. But it starts way before that. We're starting with, when they make the purchase, are they under warranty or a contract? Who is the best technician to be able to get out on site if they do have an issue? Do they have the right parts in the van? Can I get that technician the information and the knowledge that they need while they're on site through social channels or through knowledge management? So it's a really broad set of capabilities. It's enabled from a mobile perspective from inception here as well, so that no technician is out there in the field alone. They have their mobile device. They have everything they need to do on their mobile device. So it's a broad end-to-end field service suite. We also have done some of our own research this year. We did a survey in January with our customers to help them assess the true impact of ServiceMax on their business. And you see some of the logos of the customers that responded to our survey. We had more than 50 customers respond. And we were super excited about some of the results. So I'll share just one slide on this. But you'll see that our customers are really seeing the impact on their service business. So our customers reported they saw a 31% increase in technician productivity, which is awesome. A 14% increase in service revenue, 11% increase in first-time fixed rates, customer satisfaction scores increasing by 16%, and then declines in field service costs and average time to repair of 16% each. So really significant business impacts. These are metrics that the CFOs love to see, and great results from our customers. And then we also wanted to mention that ServiceMax is built on the Force.com platform from Salesforce.com. It's a proven, fantastic platform for us to deliver in the cloud, and then also to give you that one point of visibility across your customer when used in conjunction with Salesforce's Sales Cloud and Service Cloud capabilities. So when you have ServiceMax in conjunction with Salesforce, you're never asking the customer the same question twice, because the sales guy already asked this, he found out the answer, it ends up in a gray area somewhere, and then your service person has no visibility into what their issue was and what was going on. That never happens because of the great link that we have with Salesforce.com and the wonderful platform that we're on. And so with that, I've got just a summary slide on some of the key takeaways around ServiceMax, and we want to open up for questions. So Allie, let me turn it over to you to go through some final thoughts, and if you haven't already submitted your questions, that panel's on the right side of your screen, and please submit your questions now.
Thank you, Susan. So I think, both Rick and I will have, a couple final thoughts before we jump into the Q&A section. But, definitely, throughout our data from an overall state of service perspective, the rise of profitability and the need for service to drive profits is going to be key for the best in class as we look in 2013 and beyond. We stated clearly, that over 10% service margins outperform product margins, and it's a key area not only for differentiation for the service organization, but how you can show the overall business the value that service is to the top and bottom line for the business. We've also seen that more and more organizations are looking to finding new services in order to have the entire business be service-centric and drive better customer value. So value-added services are the new way to get at servicing your current customer base as opposed to needing to look at acquiring new customers. So not only showing your customers through your service offerings that you value their time by responding to their calls or improving your overall first-time fix rate, but actually providing them with newer services that can actually impact their business. One of the other areas that we definitely saw value throughout this data is looking at measurement of the key metrics within your space. So measuring profitability, looking at that as a key metric for your organization, and then leveraging those measurements to actually drive customer satisfaction. So looking at your customer satisfaction scores, looking at raising that, try and true happy customers are going to lead to a bigger share of wallet and better profitability. One thing that I'm happy to see is that we are noticing that throughout our research, IT service budgets are increasing for service. We are finding that more and more CFOs and CIOs are understanding the value of the service organization, but we still have more work to do. We're currently the service organizations conflicted with not having enough infrastructure, but I definitely think that Rick outlined a couple ways that you can get in front of your CFO and your C-suite and actually get the share of budget that you need to improve the technology infrastructure for the service organization. Rick, at this time, I'll turn it over to you if you have any other final thoughts.
Yeah, just to reiterate kind of first principles, the service organization owns the leadership around delivering on customer success. And they got to own it, and they got to drive it, and every executive needs to know this. And coupled with that, aligning with the CFO, because, look, if you do the first really well, the economics that result from that can be really attractive. So, partner with the CFO, get the CFO involved, and really drive this.
All right. I think at this point we want to turn it over for some questions.
Yeah, so we have questions coming in. Again, if you have a question at this time, go ahead and submit it through the Q&A panel. But one of the first questions, and I'll address it to Allie, and I'm sure Rick will have want to jump in as well. When discussing service as a profit center, do you have any insight into the typical business functions by the service profit center? The reason why this person asks is their profit center has ownership of other functions besides field service and depot service.
Right. From our perspective here at Aberdeen, we did break out how the service organization, individual service functions are being managed as a profit center. We looked at it holistically. So for us, when we look at the service organization, it impacts, parts management, it impacts the field service operations. It's a part of it is the contact center. So all three of those, key service functions are what we look to as to how organizations are managing their business. And we do see that the best in class are able to, manage all three of those service functions profitably. And each of those have opportunities to drive increased revenues within the business. And so, from best in class perspective, those would definitely be the three functions that we see as ways that organizations can get at that profit-centric view of service.
Yeah, my experience has been similar to the way Allie conducted the research, which is sort of services broadly defined. So everything from really every part of the organization that routinely touches the customer, call center to field service and everything in between and related to that.
Okay, perfect. There were one or two questions about ServiceMax and how it works with Salesforce.com. So maybe, Susan, you can take us through in a little more detail there, sort of our relationship and a little bit more on the technical side, how it works.
Sure. So one of the questions specifically was around, they already have Salesforce. How does that fit together with ServiceMax? So typically, we work alongside with Salesforce.com. So your call center agents, your salespeople are using Sales Cloud and Service Cloud, and then your technicians typically will live and breathe in ServiceMax. So those are the folks that usually need the ServiceMax full capability, and then that gives your other users insight into what's going on in the field as well, which is really important. Also, we have some organizations, because we are an OEM of Salesforce, that buy all their licenses kind of through us. So if you aren't already a Salesforce customer, you don't have to go to Salesforce and buy separate licenses. You can come to ServiceMax, and we can give you the pieces that you need to run your service business and be able to use things like the case object and that type of thing in your service operations.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Susan. Another question, and Allie, I'll have you start with this one, is what are some examples of how what you talk about best-in-class service organizations drive new revenue?
Okay, yeah, it's a really good question, and I think first we need to put in place the fact that these best-in-class organizations are looking at building partnerships with their customers, with their end customer, and in doing that, they're much more so going to be consultative in their relationship. So it's not just selling a box, a product being sold and then servicing it at some point when it breaks or fails, but actually working with your end users to understand their business and to actually provide them with high value-added services. Some of these are training tools, setting up training sessions so that the end customer understands how to maximize the value of the asset that you're providing in the field from an equipment perspective. We've also seen more performance-based pricing, so the pricing the revenue being accrued by the servicing organizations based on how well the end customer does from a performance perspective, which definitely ties in the partnership of the two together. And then one of the other key areas that I've been taking a look at from a best-in-class perspective is increased or more alignment with parts pricing, so service spare parts. Not only being cost-based pricing, but actually look at newer ways to price based on the value that your customers perceive, and showing them the value of those spare parts and actually driving at newer revenue streams to the resale of those parts. So those would be the three main areas I see from an overall driving of new service revenues perspective.
Okay, great. Rick, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so examples I've seen in kind of our business and the technology business, customer health checks. So doing customer health checks and going deeper and sort of checking against the original business case and finding out, working with customers where perhaps we've been short on those and helping to drive, getting to those, business case metrics. And sometimes that's additional product, but oftentimes, as Allie mentioned, training. So these, especially when you're a complex product environment, a lot of capabilities of the product that customers are either unaware of or they just haven't gotten to yet and don't realize the impact. So additional trainings can be a great way. But I think shining the light first and foremost through kind of customer health checks around the business case, around usage, can help drive, training and other related services.
Okay, perfect. And it looks like this is going to be our last question, unless somebody sends one in here and while we address this last one. So to you, Allie, what currently stops CFOs and service organizations from investing into service, or what can you advise this particular person on as it relates to talking to their CFO and what to avoid, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest barrier, and I believe Rick outlined this in his portion, is that the CFO needs to see the business value of both the project around service and the overall service strategy. These organizations that if there's a barrier what's stopping the CFO from investing in the service operation, it's not a strategic arm of the organization. So either there isn't a CSO in place or someone in charge of service to actually drive at goals that can be realized, showing the metrics and the impact of the service organization to the C-suite, showing them the impact of increased satisfaction on key metrics like profitability and revenue growth. I think the key that we're seeing from our research is that the barrier that's stopping CFOs from investing in the service organization is not a direct link between the service operations and success with business measures.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Ali said. And, perhaps trying to engage the CFO to better understand the service organization and the service operations would help really make the business case resonate even more.
All right, good. Well, wow, that brings us just 2 to 3 minutes shy of the top of the hour. So you'll see on your screen now the contact information for both of our speakers. And as Rick said, feel free to reach out with any follow-up questions. His email address is there, and same with Ali. So thank you so much for joining us today, and hope to have you on a future ServiceMax and/or Aberdeen group webinar.